Andrew Ferrier, co-founder and managing partner of Digital Venture Partners. It's one of the only minority-owned cannabis portfolio companies. And today I have a very special guest with me who I'm very excited to have a conversation with, Mrs. Ericka Pittman. She is from Brooklyn, New York, and has really built her way in her name as a powerful brand architect, a Black voice within our culture, and someone who has shown that they can continually apply their talent successfully, no matter what industry that they decide to go into. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Ericka.
Thank you.
To give our viewers today just a brief backstory of what brought you into marketing, how you became known as a premier brand architect, and kind of what talents are required to really create and grow brands.
So I'm Ericka Pittman, born and raised in New York. I started my career, ironically enough, in the digital space, way back when the World Wide Web first started. I worked at a company called iVillage, and I was in the advertising and marketing department there. Went to college, majored in corporate communications, and then I went into sales. I sold media advertising for about 15 years. Moved up the ranks through different magazines like Glamour, Honey, Heart and Soul, Savoy, Vibe magazine, which everybody knows and loves. And ultimately, I got burned out. I was tired of selling. But what I realized is a lot of the success that I created from sales was because I was a marketer, and I was creating programs and opportunities for brands to thrive and flourish within the audience that we served with the magazines that I worked for. And so I started to pursue a career in marketing, and everyone told me that I would never become an executive in marketing because I didn't go to Kellogg, and I hadn't worked in marketing industry previously. But doing a lot of informationals and having a lot of conversations, I stumbled across one CMO by the name of Amani Duncan, who now I believe works at Viacom, and who I adore. She and I had an informational, and I told her about a dream job, which would be a hybrid between a strategic marketer and a sales capacity. And we created a role at Blue Flame Agency, which is Sean Combs' company, in 2009. I worked there for just shy of 10 years. I had about 7 different jobs. I was promoted 7 times within that company. I ran our agency at one point as the vice president, alongside Dia Sims, who was the general manager there. We launched all the fabulous, successfully amazing flavors in Ciroc, and we launched De Leon and did a bunch of great stuff. Ultimately moved over to Sean Combs' water company, Aqua Hydrate, as the CMO there. I ran that business for about 2 years and decided to take a little break to figure out what I wanted. My career had sort of blossomed and evolved over the years, and I didn't know what was next for me. And so I just took a little time off to recalibrate and figure some things out. Ultimately consulted for Viacom with BET and Scott Mills. And I got a call from Viola last year about an opportunity here. And I thought, wow, I'd wanted to get into cannabis for so many years. I watched the industry, was always very, very curious, staying close by, but never really finding a lane that made sense for me. And after speaking with Al and just understanding his vision and what his goals are for people of color within the cannabis industry, the company is named after his grandmother. That gives you an indicator of the purpose and the levity of what he's trying to accomplish. And I was sold on the dream. I always joke and say he had me at hello. I was like, of course I want to do this. This is an opportunity to help my people. This is an opportunity to make groundbreaking work in an industry that's so young and so green, no pun intended. And I just was really excited about the opportunity. So that's what sort of brought me to cannabis. I think the second half of your question was, talents do you need? I think being a strategic thinker is really important in marketing. I think really figuring out how to create synergies both within your company and externally with the outside world. So leveraging relationships, understanding timing, seasonality, and being able to sort of predict trends and more importantly, really, really understanding audiences and consumer behavior, because marketing is a mental tool. Like you're engaging people and trying to figure out how to persuade them to consider your product, to become loyal to your product or your service. And there's a little bit of alchemy that goes into marketing that I think requires a lot of intuition. It's a lot of gut instinct. I think is very, very important. But one of the other things that I think is really key and a lot of people discount, and I know I mentioned Kellogg, which is a fantastic school for an MBA. They have amazing marketing programs. I don't diminish the importance of having formalized education, because there's an ideology and a methodology that goes into marketing that a lot of people don't realize. It is not about just throwing a great party or having access to a ton of influencers. It is really analytics, it's big data, it is strategizing with quantified results and being able to map out a plan that has return on investment and has some sort of a specific process involved.
They are trying to pivot, right? So Didi may go from music to, wine and spirits or water or wherever, or Al going from being an MBA veteran to a cannabis entrepreneur. What's the process of successfully pivoting a brand into something else?
What is the process?
Right.
I think it's a function of a few things. Most things it's just this sort of an education curve, right? It's a learning curve. And so I think, what Al is doing and what Sean Combs has really been successful at doing is reiterating to the general public their prowess in these different spaces. I think it's interesting. I've had several dialogues throughout my career around Sean Combs and, who he is. And, some people refer to him as a rapper. Some people refer to him as a music mogul. But really what he is a marketer. He is a marketing genius. He's brilliant at it. And most people don't realize that his business was a $900 million empire. It's a whole company. There's fashion, there's spirits, there's music, there's water, there's television. He has a television network, for Christ's sake, right? And so when you think about his ability to move beyond music and evolve, I think, and getting the general public to sort of, I think, absorb that and embrace that, it just comes from really telling your story. I think Al is doing a fantastic job of that, really anchoring himself in this community and in this industry as an expert and as a leader. He continuously does interviews and has dialogue and conversations. He's on panels. He's, with legislators, and really injecting himself and utilizing his celebrity as a platform to expand the conversation around what he's doing now, right? And so I think that's the key. The key for anyone is to utilize the tools that we already have in our toolbox and what we're known for to tell a different story. That's actually occurring right now in my own career as we continue to interview about cannabis and have a conversation about Sean Combs, right? So, that obviously is what I've been known for over the last 9 years in my career, but that is not who I am, and that is not where I'm going. So it's important to utilize the conversation as you have it to tell a broader story about where you're evolving to. And I think that's what they've both been able to do really, really successfully.
Yeah, it's amazing. I actually want to kind of pivot that into your personal story. Something that I admire about you, and I watched it in a previous interview where you talked about you had to find your way, where originally you were thinking about maybe going into accounting or being an attorney before ultimately figuring out that you had a real talent for marketing. And I think that's a narrative that young Black people don't get to hear, especially in the age of social media. We just see these successful people and we just read these stories about the youngest person to do this, the youngest woman that has that, right? And I think a lot of the success is continually failing and continually having to say, okay, I'm going to adapt. What advice do you give to people who, see the success happening around them, or they see this industry emerging, but they're not quite sure how they could benefit from it, or, where they kind of fit in?
Okay, so the first part of your question was, sort of people watching success and understanding the evolution of success. And I think the process of success is what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really, I always tell people, you have to run your race. Everyone's journey is different, right? And I know we see a lot of prodigy, we see the Tiger Woods and the Serena Williams and Venus Williamses of the world who were, successes in their teens. Even Sean Combs, he was a success at 19 years old. I think there are people that have been blessed with a knowing of who they are and what they want to do very, very early on in their lives, and they have the opportunity to thrive very, very quickly. But then there are those of us that need to find our way and get our footing and understand life a little bit and get to know our own selves a little bit to understand what we're passionate about. And I just think that we all have to be a little bit more gentle with ourselves and understand that it's all a process. And we will get there when we're supposed to get there. When you look at, some of the greats like Sam Jackson, right? He didn't start acting until well into his career. Even Morgan Freeman, became a success very, very late in his life. I just saw a meme the other day, which I knew this factually. Jay-Z didn't start really rapping successfully until he was 26 years old. He was almost 30 and he was a breakout rapper. That's insane. And now he's like a billionaire, so you just have to run your race, and we have to stop comparing ourselves to everyone around us. And unfortunately, social media has created a space where you can't escape it. So I would just offer individuals that are, looking for their footing to just try different things. And that's why internships are so important. It is important to intern, sometimes for free, believe it or not. You sometimes have to work for free. Not all the time, but you do, to kind of learn and learn your way. But I think internships are important because it familiarizes you with environments and exposes you to different things that perhaps you didn't even know you were good at, until you figure it out. For me, I was blessed. I just really knew what I wanted to do ultimately. I read the curriculum for corporate communications and realized, wow, I want to be a marketer. That's what I want to do. And it spoke to me, but not everybody has that straight away. So
I actually want to get your feedback on kind of like what perception did you have of how the cannabis industry would be versus how it is now that you're a little bit more immersed in it. Is there any real differences as a
Oh,
marketer?
absolutely. It's funny. I thought I had an idea of what cannabis would be, but I was quickly corrected. First of all, let's talk about how cannabis is a 24-hour business. It does not stop. It is very, very similar to the spirits industry. In spirits, nightlife is a huge part of marketing and process. So you spend a lot of long nights managing the process at night, right? And so it becomes a 24-hour job. Similar to that, that's what cannabis is, and I was not aware of that. And I think for it to be such a new industry, there are so many nuances. It's agricultural when you think about it. It's a plant, right? So you're actually marketing and selling a plant, and plants are fickle. Plants have personalities. They need a lot of care. There's a lot of process that goes into cultivating plants. And because of that, the plant market is very fluctuating, almost like the stock market, right? And so a plant availability becomes a factor. So the value of your plant varies based on availability, right? And based on the market that you're in. And so there are all of these very specific nuances, not even factoring in the legalities around cannabis, right? And so what we can do in California is very different from what we can do in Michigan, and vice versa. So there are so many nuances to the business. It becomes a very technical industry, and I wasn't aware that it was this nuanced. So I'm excited because I'm learning as I go, but I think there's a lot to learn when you want to get into this industry, and a lot to retain information-wise. And it's just really a very, very labor-intensive job. And it's exciting and wonderful, but I just would have never expected that.
I had made a note to ask you coming in as an executive for a multi-state company, let alone just trying to come into the cannabis industry at all, I know it had to be very tedious because you have to learn the regulations of each specific state, right? And they really constrain us on how we can market at this point. So I would love to get an idea of what have been some of the workarounds that you found as an expert marketer on how to still uh, communicate the Viola storyline, even though you can't really market it normally.
That's a very good question. And the reason why I came here is Viola is a brand. Viola is a brand. It literally is personified, right? I mean, it's named after his grandmother, right? So it
Right.
has a persona. And when you have that persona baked into a product already, it makes it easier to create communication and dialogue around it, right? And so while the ethos of what Viola is cannabis, we are rooted in the plant first, obviously, but people and purpose are our pillars. And I created this sort of trifecta of plant, people, purpose, because I think it's really, really important for us to focus in those different pillars. And so purpose is just that. So now we can have dialogue around the social impact work that we're able to do, which is a national conversation. We're not talking about cannabis. We're talking about saving lives. We're talking about education. We're talking about incubation, entrepreneurship, expungement. We're talking about legislation. Those are all national conversations. And so now we have a platform to expand our brand awareness and our connectivity with the audience that we want to target in a very unique and legitimate way. And I think the key is when you create a brand, when you are coming out with a product or a service, you need to create a brand around it to be able to broaden your horizon around what you can talk about. So that's the key. You know, we found a way to uniquely inject Viola into culture. And because of that, we were able to have a national presence.
Okay. And actually, when I had my conversation with Al, he brought you up last week when he said that bringing you on, you made him very aware of how the company needs to more effectively market to women, and I think cannabis as a whole, right? He said that Viola, before you came on board, was very dominated, right? It looked like a basketball player's weed company, right? And he said you came in and you opened up his way of thinking on how the company should and could look, right? So as a woman, as a Black woman, a lot of times you have to market your idea to the company internally and get them to buy in before you can even market it to the public. So what was that process for you coming in and just kind of realigning how Al could see how his own brand could look?
Well, you know, it's funny, and I'm glad you mentioned that, you know, and I appreciate Al for acknowledging that. You know, I think things are just perspective, and that's why it's important to diversify your boardroom, right? It is very important to have a diverse boardroom and not just male, female, diverse. I mean, all spectrums, you know, different races, cultures, religions, because what you do is you bring a perspective that perhaps the greater whole didn't see before, right? And so I think one of the good things about this is Al is very open to the possibilities of what his brand can become. He wants to evolve it and grow it and make it as big and broad as he can. So he's very, very open to the idea of new communication and new ways to think about things. But to answer your question specifically, it's, you know, it's a challenge for any marketer. You have to get the buy-in of your stakeholders first before you can take it out to the masses. So you need to create alignment, and how you do that is through, you know, very well thought out plans and programs that show efficacy. So you need to be able to show how this one particular idea or activation is going to generate whatever the key performance indicators are, or whatever the goals are. You know, if you are trying to, you know, grow revenues, you need to figure out what your customer strategies are to really grow sales and grow conversions. If you're trying to create awareness, you need to really put together a robust campaign that's going to be able to tell your message to a broad audience. So it really is about being anecdotal about your presentation to your stakeholders so that they can buy in and get alignment, and then taking it out to the masses. But it is a repeated sell-in all the time.
I was watching an interview that you had on BT when you were talking about reading the room, right? So I say that because, as you said, in the entertainment industry, it's a lot of alpha personalities, right? In cannabis, do you feel like it's kind of a different way you have to navigate these conversations, or just the psyche of the industry as a whole, as opposed to entertainment?
No, I think it's the same thing. I've actually worked in a few different industries. So I've worked in media, uh, consumer packaged goods with water, spirits.
Right.
I think people are people,
Mm-hmm.
and human behavior is human behavior. So the conversation doesn't really change. I think the culture varies depending on where you are. So, how you operate at a record label is very different from how you operate at a bank, right?
Right.
But you still have a CEO, you still have stakeholders, you still have counterparts, you still have subordinates. So it's still the same business dynamic. I think what I've found is there are different cultures in different environments. Working at Google is very different from working at Oppenheimer. It's just going to be a different experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's for any industry. So it's not very different for me. And I believe in being wholeheartedly who you are. So I'm a professional. I conduct myself as a professional. And, I may tone it down a bit when in terms of, like, for instance, like the way that I dress. I dress very differently at Viola than perhaps I would in a super corporate company. But nonetheless, I'm still professional and still buttoned up. I'm still going to use my words. I'm still going to present a deck. And I'm still going to have a standard operating procedure and a scope of work, and be a professional. And, the key is to build an environment up, not to come down. So I haven't really had any issues with transitioning across industries, to be honest.
People feel like, I have my license, I have a dispensary, people will just come. And they never really created a great storyline around their brand. And I appreciate, someone like yourself coming in and building that with Viola, because it's just not prevalent in the industry yet. So moving forward, what do you think is the next step to advance cannabis on a public level, to where people actually feel comfortable consuming legal products?
I think it's education. I think it's education. We have been conditioned to demonize this plant, right? There is a stigma around cannabis. There's a lot of apprehension because of the consequences of what might happen to some of us, particularly African Americans, when we engage in cannabis. So the key is to really broaden people's purview to what cannabis is and the effects of cannabis and how to engage cannabis responsibly. So one of my biggest missions is to create educational platforms that invite what I have really adopted as the audience that I want to target is the Canna Curious audience. There is a community of people that are coming into this space now that it is safe in, let's call it 11 states, I think it is recreational, and 32 states are medical recreational.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty much a broad conversation. And now it's time to start inviting people that perhaps were ashamed or afraid or concerned about cannabis to the conversation. And the more we start to have very easy and layman conversations about what this plant does, what it is, the history, and how to utilize it, I think people will start to be a little bit more relaxed, similar to what's happening with CBD.
What advice would you give to, like, a young Black talented woman who wants to pivot into cannabis like yourself? What do you feel like she could expect, or something that people didn't tell you before you stepped into the industry?
She can expect, like many other industries, it's very male dominated. I think 80% of the executives are white men.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is unfortunate, because 80% of the people that are in prison for cannabis are Black people.
Right.
So it's interesting how that works. And that's what we're trying to sort of balance the scales around here at Viola a bit. But she can just expect, I think, cannabis is not dissimilar to other industries. It's just a new industry. And I talk about this a lot. Prohibition was 88 years ago. It's not even a lifetime ago, So when you think about how cliche and taboo spirits was 89 years ago, 90 years ago, you couldn't drink. It was, oh my God, you're drinking. Oh, why would you be drinking a cocktail? It was absurd, right? And now you can't watch a television show without somebody having a bourbon in their office. It's sort of commonplace. And I suspect because of technology and because of access to information, cannabis will be socialized in a much faster pace. In 15 years, cannabis is going to be like smoking a cigarette. It's going to be very, very commonplace. And I think that women can expect the same obstacles in cannabis as they're going to expect in any other position of power, in any industry. The key is that it's a new industry, and so the rules are evergreen. They're constantly changing, and so being adept and abreast of all of the nuances of the industry is what's going to keep any leader, male or female, ahead of the curve.
Right, and I love that you mentioned that it's really a 10 to 15 year roadmap for cannabis. I think a huge misconception on the outside is that people can just jump in and get rich quick. But the learning curve is so steep. I don't care how intellectual you are. It's going to take time for you to get up to speed. And then by then, the industry will have changed again, right? So a question I wanted to ask you as a marketer, and it's ironic because in cannabis, all the markets aren't even open yet because certain states are still illegal. Are there any states that or certain areas that you're excited about legalizing in the future, just for the challenge of marketing there, like for instance, maybe New York State or Georgia?
You nailed it. New York is a huge one. Georgia's a huge one. I'm very, very excited that Chicago is now legal. Those are exciting markets. I mean, when you talk about the top DMAs, these are highly populated municipalities that we all want to tap into as marketers, no matter what you're marketing. So, to have the opportunity to, market cannabis and have a legal cannabis community in New York would be phenomenal. I'm salivating about the idea of being able to create programming in those states that you mentioned. But I think, the top ones are always exciting. Right now, we're almost there. Right now, we're in a pretty good place.
Yeah, every year it seems like New York is right there on the cusp of legalizing, but it never goes through. But the governor actually just guaranteed that it'll legalize next year, which he did last year. But I'm really excited about Atlanta also because, Atlanta is just so influential to Black culture and then by extension, American culture. I think once Atlanta legalizes and New York, I think it'll kind of change the influence of how to really brand a company. Because right now you have to be prominent in the Bay. You have to really have a presence in Northern California. And I think on the East Coast, Atlanta or New York will become that also. So I'm super excited about that.
Absolutely.
My last question to you would be, you've accomplished a lot, right? Inside and outside of cannabis. What are some of your personal challenges that you have in the near future or just left, period?
Well, I wrote a book behind me. Very, very excited about my book. Everybody, I'm going to do a shameless plug about my book, What Mommy Never Told You, A Woman's Guide to the Next Phases of Life. So any woman watching this should probably go on Amazon and grab this book. It is, I like to say, it's 2 parts memoir, 1 part self-help. So, that was a big goal for me, getting that book done. It took me about 12 years to finish that book because it was just a very vulnerable space to sort of put myself out there in that way and talk about my life and growing up. And it's a little bit Pollyanna, to be honest with you. I had a really great childhood. which I, knock wood, was blessed with. But I learned a lot along the way, being first generation in a lot of instances. Just first to graduate college, first to purchase, property and own my own homes. And, obviously first to be a CMO. I'm actually the first African-American female CMO in cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so being a first, you don't always have a ton of guidance on how to navigate the water. So there was a lot of learning curve that I had to endure, and a lot of toe stumps. Like, I stumped my toe along the way a lot, but I learned a lot nonetheless. So for me, I think my goal now is to really figure out how to help my culture. Mm-hmm. Originally, my passion was about young females, and really, pushing young females to be their greatest selves and expand and stretch. And you don't have to fit the mold of what society says you should look like or have experienced to be successful. And that's still a passion point for me. But I think I've broadened it just a little bit to create more structured process around the African-American experience in America. We are not doing a fantastic job as a people at galvanizing and coming together in a unified front as systemic. There are a lot of reasons and answers to why that is. But I think that I want to be able to utilize my expertise in strategy and in marketing to help to bring African Americans together and to tell a bigger story in this country.
It's weird to hear you say, because to say you're a pioneer at anything in 2020 sounds weird to say or hear, but I can attest to that. Like, even when we were putting this series together and I was just looking for people to interview and have conversations with, it was just not a lot of women at all, especially Black women. So for someone so young and in a new industry to be the face of being a Black executive, that's really amazing to see. And I think you're doing an amazing job. And I've actually seen firsthand kind of how you're growing the Viola brand and how it's starting to infiltrate the cultural conversation, right? When you see like Meek Mill or Lil Baby casually mention a cannabis brand, I love to see it, just because it's moving away from just saying, hey, I have weed, right? Everybody says I have weed or I have good weed. But for you to be able to have that prowess where these people can attach that to your brand, I think that's amazing to see. Fortunate to have a conversation with you, because there's not a lot of Black people in the space at all, especially women. So I think you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'm going to read your book also. Thank you. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you have anything else you want to mention? I'll just do like a close out, and then I'll just have you.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, everyone, you can follow me at Ericka M. Pittman. That's Ericka M. Pittman. That's my Twitter and IG handle. And yeah, everybody go grab the book, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. And, hopefully everyone will get into cannabis, and we can stretch this category a little bit and get some color in here.
Yeah, I genuinely appreciate that. And I always try to tell people, I try to give people comprehensive information, because I think when you're making a leap, it's good to be motivated and inspired, but you have to be informed also, right? You have to have a real clear perspective, and you have to have really realistic expectations. And I don't think it's a lot of people who look like us who can give those right now. So it's very valuable that you would share that with people.